Hello, and thank you for tuning into another episode of the New Orchard Show. One of the key themes we'll be focusing on this show is regenerative agriculture, healthy, high quality food, spiritual connection to the farming process in the land, as well as the ongoing war on small farming. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around what is happening in farming in general if you're not paying much attention. We're facing a reality which would be hard to ignore even for those who are not directly connected to agriculture. Across the entire globe, we're seeing lawsuits and public outcry about the dangers of industrial farming practices, especially the unchecked use of herbicides and pesticides that damage not only our health, but our communities and ecosystems. Let's use the famous Monsanto, which is now owned by a German company called Bayer, as an example. That company has faced over 125,000 lawsuits in America alone, which claims that its product Roundup, containing glyphosate, has been linked to cancer in numerous individuals. Plaintiffs have now won nearly $5 billion American dollars in Roundup verdicts. The fallout has reached Europe as well, where some countries like Germany, where Bayer is headquartered, are set to ban glyphosate by the end of this year, by end of 2024. In Australia, pesticide regulation has come under scrutiny as well, with over 3,000 tons of glyphosate used annually, raising concerns about the long-term health impacts and biodiversity loss. You have to ask yourself, how did these chemicals gain such extensive approval despite clear health warnings? Evidence seems to point to a troubling dynamic. Regulatory bodies that are often too intertwined with the very industries they try to regulate. I think this dynamic is pretty well understood in society when it comes to pharmaceutical industrial complex, but less so in big agriculture. In the US, the Environmental Protection Agency, the famous EPA, approval of pesticides has faced numerous lawsuits from environmental groups claiming that the agency downplays risks to human health. The regulatory landscape has often been criticized as inadequate in the face of lobbying pressures. Let me give you an example. Although California's Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment added glyphosate to its list of carcinogens, Bayer successfully prevented California from mandating a cancer warning label on Roundup products. This reflects a broader pattern where regulatory bodies sometimes fail to act decisively, leaving small farmers and consumers quite vulnerable. Europe has its own struggles with balancing agricultural policies and health standards, and Australia too faces pressures from powerful agribusiness interests which can complicate the regulatory landscape and delay meaningful reform. In the midst of these challenges, Wendell Berry, who is our guest today, is a beacon of resilience and hope. Following in the footsteps of her father, the great Wendell Berry, whose book The Unsettling of America has warned us about these very issues decades ago. It exposed the risks of industrial agriculture and argued for farming practices that preserve land and community health. Mary has been leading a new agricultural movement that is deeply rooted in the values of stewardship, community, and respect for the land. Through the Berry Center, she's been championing programs that protect and promote small sustainable farms. The center aims to revitalize rural America by supporting small farmers and advocating for responsible, sustainable practices. Her initiative, Our Home Place Meat, is a testament to this commitment, creating a model that empowers farmers to raise animals responsibly and connect directly with consumers who want transparency in their food system. In this interview, we will explore Mary's vision for American farming and her father's legacy. I'll be asking questions about how we can restore not just our soil, but our relationship with the land. We'll also take on topics featured in The Unsettling of America. There's quite a lot of ground to cover, so let's just dive in. Mary, before we started recording, you've mentioned that despite decades of hard work, despite of our local dynamic food movement, and despite all of the effort, you've mentioned that the farmland and good farmers continue to vacate the landscape. They continue to disappear. I don't want us to start with too much pessimism, as ultimately I would like us to inspire with this episode and inspire with the Wendell family story. But I do want to find out more. So do you mind elaborating and telling us what have you been witnessing on the ground over the last couple of years?
I started the center in 2011. Somewhere around 2009, I went to my father in the place we call the camp. People who read his work call it the long-legged house, but it's the camp that he does his writing. And I said, Daddy, in spite of something like a 40-year old local food movement, and in spite of all the work many people have done, good work, we are losing farmers and farmland more and more quickly. Certainly in Henry County, we were losing our farmers, our farmland, and our culture just so very quickly. And I listed the things that I thought needed to be worked on. The problem of miseducation of farmers, the need to educate farmers in homecoming and how to live in particular places and do as little harm as possible, leave them better than they found the places, and pass those places on along with the knowledge it takes to farm well. I talked about access to capital. I talked about well, it was a long list. And my father said, it sounds like you're starting a center. Well, at that point, I hadn't thought about starting a center. But as I think I mentioned earlier, I haven't disagreed with him very often. And so I started a center. Our work is going very well. Our work with Our Home Place Meat, our Farm and Forest Institute, the bookstore and the culture center and the archival work we do, all of that is going very well. And we've been lucky to be able to do this good work. On the other hand, we have fewer farmers in America than we have had since 1850, when we had 31 states and 4 territories. We just simply have abandoned the land economy and the people that ought to belong to the land. And that is all coming home to roost now, I believe. Our political discord, our social discord, the destruction of the land and the people, and so on, just continues. So I got tired really of waiting. That's another reason I started the center. My husband said to a group of farmers who met at the Berry Center early on in the center's life, the cavalry ain't coming. We got to do this ourselves. And I think that's just a very important, maybe that's the most important lesson I've learned from my family, which is what's happened to our rural places. Our land, our people has not been inevitable. It's been destruction by design. And while that's pushed us way out on the margins, while often I feel, I certainly don't feel alone in this work, but I do understand how far away from the what passes for public conversation in this country we are. But also that idea that what's happened here has not been inevitable is extremely strengthening. And I want more people to see things that way. This is not inevitable. It does not have to be this way. It can be another way. And so when I started the center, it was very important to me to do what was right in front of us to do. What could we do? Where could we take hold? So that started with an inventory of what we still have here to work with. And that inventory gave us a place to start. We still have something left of a farm culture. We still have some farmers who know how to farm and are passionate farmers. We have a well-watered landscape most of the time, sometimes too well-watered, but most of the time. We have access to markets in cities that were sort of in the middle of the city of Louisville, the city of Lexington, Kentucky, and then Cincinnati, Ohio. And there were other things on the list, but I'm a big believer in that inventory, because the inventory, if people would do it, would place them. I think it would actually give roots to movements instead of just sort of disconnected movements that exist up in the cloud somewhere. Start them down at the ground and move from there.
That's really interesting and quite positive, actually. I've always been fascinated by you Americans. You seem to have the best and the worst of the world existing in this perpetual tension. On one hand, there are people like you and your father who have dedicated their lives trying to bring things back on the natural tracks, more in line with the natural world. On the other hand, you have this ruthless, totally out of control, unmoderated, totalizing hand of capitalism with this winner takes all mentality, no matter the cost. One of the reasons why I've started New Orchard was because I've noticed a small emerging trend with small minority of city dwellers slowly but surely checking out of the city lifestyle and its inherent destructive economy and searching for a piece of land, retooling their lives and acquiring new skills required to work that land. I find this movement quite fascinating, and I'm personally excited to see people moving in that direction. These are the stories I want to tell here. One thing I wanted to mention to you is that this new movement, if we're going to call it that, is somewhat inhibited by how the land is priced. Simply put, majority of people who want to give this idea a red hot go, they can't afford it.
Well, there's a lot to say about that. First of all, that desire to do something for oneself and one's community is so important. It's the human part of us, the desire to connect. I do think sometimes that what we hang on just a minute, Beth. Would you close that door, please? Thank you. Part of the problem of young people now who want to go to the country, they want to live on farms or live from the land, is that they don't have the knowledge to do it. My father has called this the idea that if farmers can farm, surely anybody can farm. It doesn't take a degree. It doesn't take it doesn't take a expert training from an institution. You can just go out and do it. Well, this turns out not to be true. Um, good farmers have collected and learned an amazing amount of information, and they have a passion and a love for what they're doing. And what we had once, and what Daddy speaks about in The Unsettling, is we had a culture that taught. So, and the culture allowed for this good land use to continue. It has not been the dominant strain in this country, but it was a strong one. So one of the things I've needed to talk about in my travels and my speaking, as gently as possible, is one of the reasons we've gotten here now, when we have fewer farmers than we've had since 1850, is that we have never valued farmers. We have, I mean, they're the peasantry. They're the people who work with their hands. And so our culture has not valued them, and has valued them. I mean, there's a lot of nostalgic chatter about farming and the old ways and so on, but we haven't truly valued them. We haven't made it possible for these people to make a living, and therefore we have lost them. And now we're reaping the really tragic problems associated with that loss. Although in our public conversation, at least in this country, those things are not, I never hear them connected. That the environmental problems, the social problems, the terrible divides in our country have the root in this loss of placed people, um, people who love their places, love their communities, and expect that their grandchildren will also be in these places. It makes decision making. It makes for different kinds of decisions. We've just monetized everything here. If it doesn't make money, if it doesn't make a lot of money, it just simply doesn't matter. And farmland happens to be worth a lot of money. So, and we've and I think I'm sure you know, and I don't know anything about Australia's agricultural history much, or know a little about the UK's. But we actually had policy in this country starting in about 1952. Ezra Taft Benson said, "We've got too many farmers. We need to get rid of them." Earl Butz said, "Get big or get out." I mean, so we've had top down. This is the part that has not been inevitable. It's been planned and carried out. And as people say, follow the money. Where's the money gone? Um, so, so that's where we are now.
Well, that's what you've said earlier to me. You've mentioned this deliberate destruction by design, which is sad, but I'm glad that people are pushing back and are tinkering with alternatives and trying to figure out how to move back to the baseline, move back to the basics, and that is so good to see. Let's try to get back to some of the questions I had prepared for you. Would you be able to describe for us what was it like growing up as the daughter of Wendell Berry? How did your dad's views and his lifestyle influence your childhood?
I was thinking about this question yesterday on a walk. I was thinking that often when you decide what something's been like, you have something else to compare it to. Um, so you make distinctions. I have always been my father's daughter, so that is my only experience. I consider myself extremely fortunate to be the daughter of Wendell and Tanya Berry, the granddaughter of John and Virginia Berry, and so on, back pretty far. Um, my father and my mother never, ever have disappointed me. I may have disappointed them. I was a young woman once, I was a teenager once, but they have never disappointed me. They do what they believe to be right, um, and they don't ever do anything they think is not right. They are not saints. They are, especially my father, is extremely funny, extremely wonderful to be with. People seem to be surprised at that because I guess his essays seem so very serious, and he seems stern in them often. But if they read the fiction, they see the humor. Um, but he is a humorous, loving man. Now, I have seen changes in him in my lifetime. Um, when he was, I mean, I was born when he was 24 years old and my mother was 22, so they were very young. Um, he was, as the years during right before The Unsettling was published, I think my father was having a very hard time. A dear friend of his, a farmer who lived about 5 miles from where I'm sitting, died at 54. Really, my father's, I don't know that Daddy would use this word, but his mentor died young. And industrialization was coming in. I mean, things were being lost quickly, and he was angry. And you can hear it in The Unsettling. He was angry that the land grant universities and so on had kind of colluded with industrial corporations to destroy the land and the people of the place he loved the most. But as the years have gone by, he just simply isn't an angry man. He is a peaceful man. He's a loving man, and he was also always loving to my brother and me. Um, so what I learned from him, I've had to. I mean, it's all of a piece. It's very hard for me to pull things out of my life because it's all kind of flows together. But I certainly learned from him to value farming, farmers, people who understood how to do this good work, how smart they were and are. Um, I learned to value books and what people had have written down to save, to help us as we go forward. I learned to love our neighbors and friends, and I learned to never be ashamed of being a country person. Never was ashamed of being a country person. Often people are. I hear around here to this day, the word country used as a pejorative. That's just so country. Um, that's he pointed out that our rural culture was being destroyed. He didn't leave anything to chance. He made sure that my brother and I were told what we should pay attention to, look and see the difference between one farm and another farm, and so on. Um, my mother, who is from California, from the Bay Area, I really think deserves all the credit that my brother and I were so happy here. If she had come here from her Northern California upbringing and been discontented here, been sorry that there wasn't a museum close by or um, all the things cities give you, I don't know that my brother and I would be such content um, farmers and country people. So I had a wonderful upbringing. I had moments that I certainly wanted to live in a city. I wanted to take regular vacations like other people did, and we did have a composting privy that my father and mother installed in the 70s. Now, this was a terrible blow to my 15-year-old self. And it was covered in the New York Times, not the New York Times, excuse me, that's overreaching. The Louisville Courier Journal, which at that time everyone read. And so that was humiliating. I mean, there were humiliations involved in all of this, but we all persevered and got to this point. I read a book called The Memory of Old Jack, written by my father when I went to college. I'd really read very little of what he'd written by the time I went to college. And other freshman classes at the school I was in were reading that book, and I read it. And there's a character in it who's a daughter of old Jack, whose name is Clara, and she had married a city person, and she'd always been embarrassed by her country upbringing, and she'd moved to the city. And anyway, it's a wonderful book, and I highly recommend it. But I wrote my father a letter, and I said, "Am I Clara?" Because I had and he wrote me a beautiful long letter that said, I was not, and Clara had become a stranger to her place, and he and I would never be strangers, and he and I have never been strangers. So I have been a fortunate person.
That's really beautiful. There's a lot of children out there who do not have a good relationship with their parents, nothing like what you had with both your mother and your father, who did put a lot of love and dedication into making
Yes.
family life special and
Yes.
wonderful. I love that you had that experience growing up. That's really awesome. I want to ask you about Our Home Place Meat, which is an initiative of the Berry Center, which you are the director of. The idea behind this venture, the idea behind Our Home Place Meat, is to, and I quote from the website, put Wendell Berry's writing to work by advocating for farmers, land conserving communities, and healthy regional economies. Can you tell us how this business was founded, how it is run, and how it's performing?
The business was founded based on my family's involvement and knowledge of a co-op that my grandfather was quite instrumental in forming, and that worked very well for small farmers in Kentucky and 8 other states for decades. My grandfather was a lawyer and a farmer, and a homecomer. Um, my father says that my grandfather did the important work. He and his brother took it up, and now the Berry Center's taken it up. And to repeat myself, that work was to put a sustaining economy under good farming. Um, I cannot replicate to that program, which was a Depression era federal program, but I can bring back, and we have brought back the two ideas that I think are essential to rebuilding population of good land users in this country, good farmers. And that idea is um, controlling production in order to maintain parity or fair pricing. Parity, in the very simplest definition, is farmers getting back cost of production and keeping a fair wage. My grandfather compared those tenets to protections in other parts of our economy that protect other segments of our economy. Um, Things like a minimum wage or a 40-hour work week, those kinds of things. So in our home place meat, we've founded in 2017. We are working with 11 small beef producers, farmers in Henry County, Kentucky, to supply markets in Louisville, Cincinnati, and Lexington, and other places as well, with a beautiful product called rose beef, delicious, well raised meat. I can tell you more about how that's processed in a minute, but that program has. It's just kind of miraculous, and I spend a lot of time knocking on wood to keep it, because it has really just been so wonderful to watch the progression and to watch the growth of the farmers and so on. And by growth, I really mean um, spiritual growth, growing community growth, kind of reestablishing the kinds of relationships between farmers and neighbors that I grew up around. I grew up uh, in this economy and this culture that was formed by the co-op I mentioned earlier. Neighbors helping neighbors, neighbors working together, sort of taking the community outside of the money economy, if you will, depending on each other. Certainly that has not been perfectly replicated, and I think I'll be long gone when it is, but I see that it's moving in that direction. Our home place meat was founded, the Berry Center is a nonprofit, and the nonprofit has shored up our home place meat while we were getting it started. But the plan for our home place meat is that it will stand alone at some point. Um, Sooner rather than later, it will be a standalone co-op owned by the farmers that are a part of it. When I started the Berry Center, I started it as a nonprofit, not because I loved the idea of a nonprofit. I just could see no other way to get done what needed to get done. I now even more strongly see no other way. I've seen a lot of co-ops come and go in our area, in our state, and I know a lot of them in the country. And part of the problem with them is that they've had people who had to make a living um, out of them while trying to make them work. And so the nonprofit, the Berry Center, has given our home place meat time to establish a market, establish the business, um, pay a couple of people now a living wage to get up every day and solve the problems that are inherent in any venture like this. And at this point, it's going very well. I'm very pleased with it.
Do you want to scale it up? Do you want to take it nationwide, or do you want to keep it local?
I want to keep it local. We have so much potential just in our local area. We might cross county lines, but I, what I want to see happen is that initiatives like our home place meet happen all over the country. And it doesn't, my grandfather thought that the basic tenets that I said earlier, production and control in order to maintain parity pricing, would work for anything farmers could produce. And I agree. And I think that, so it doesn't have to be meat. We just happen in our marginal farmland, our rolling farmland. What we've seen come in here is the toxic, erosive farming of corn and soybeans. This does not fit here. It doesn't fit anywhere. But what we also have is a population of good farmers who are cattle producers. The average cattle herd in Kentucky is 27 mother cows. This is still small farming. It fits our landscape. To people concerned about um, climate change and so on, if farmers can make a living and keep their ground covered, they will. And so we're talking about perennial forage crops, we're talking about perennial pastures, and we're talking about excellent uh, animal husbandry. These calves are processed right off their mothers at weaning weight at about close to a year old. So they're on pasture, they're on milk, and until they're not.
Well, that's phenomenal. I had a good look at the website in preparation for this interview, and I thought the way you set up the business and you found really good people to run it, it's just the operation looks really, really impressive. So well done. Well done for setting it up like that.
Well, let me say one more thing about it, because I mentioned earlier that we need a culture that will support good farming. We have watched the young farmers. They're mostly very young, especially since the average farmer in Kentucky is 65 years old. These are, under 40, pretty young. So a couple were under 30 when they started with us. When we first made our presentations to them, when we gathered them together and talked about what we wanted to do, the rooms were it was just silent. We had a room full of silent farmers. And speaking to silent farmers is one of the hardest things I've ever done. Now, when we get those people together, they're noisy. They're talking to each other. They're talking about plans. They're talking about the program. They're talking about ways that they can improve genetics and forage health. I mean, this is what we want. We want a culture of people who are helping each other, working together, working in cooperation, not competition. In this country, what we've offered farmers, we've offered them two choices. They can be industrial or they can be small and entrepreneurial. There is almost nothing in the middle and almost no help in the middle. So in the middle is where we're working.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you're saying about the middle. The middle is what usually holds the entire structure, like the middle class in our society, which has also eroded and needs work and attention. I want to ask you about The Unsettling of America. In what ways do you think that book, written by your father, has influenced both cultural and societal attitudes towards agriculture in America since its publication? How many copies did that book sell? From what you said earlier in the interview, it sounded like your dad, when he was writing that book, he was dealing with quite a lot of anger at the situation around him. I'm wondering if you could elaborate in a little bit more detail what that actually meant.
I think he was angry about what the policies were then, certainly, and the direction we were going. The book has stayed in print since 1977. It's my father calls it a curious secret life or something like that. It has sold, I would say hundreds of thousands of copies. I cannot tell you exactly how many, but it has continued. It has had a life, and it continues to have a life. I mean, we hear from people every day here, or people come to visit here who say that book changed their lives and changed their thinking. What my father was doing was trying to get at what had happened. What's happened? Why has it happened? What is the history of it happening? And of course, he starts with white people coming here and the disruption that caused, and takes it all the way through to it's, I guess, about 1976. The sad thing about that book is that it is it is as important today as it was in 1977. It's still important. The wonderful fate of that book, the best fate, would have been that it was just so no longer necessary. It simply didn't. People don't need to read it because we've figured out the error of the direction and changed it. We have not changed it. We've doubled down on it. So while on the one hand, I think that book has had a lot of effect, and it's had a lot of effect on public people that other people have heard of. Michael Pollan, Alice Waters, those people, and others. On the other hand, it certainly hasn't had any effect on Washington, D.C. It hasn't had much effect on land grant universities. It might have affected some of the professors who are teaching the sustainable part of the program that's usually tiny, and the industrial part of the ag programs are still huge, where all the money is. So I wish I could say that I think it's affected things greatly, the big picture. I don't think it has. I think it has affected people's hearts and minds, and that is important. And so we agrarians have kept this conversation alive. That's what you're doing. You're keeping the conversation going. And as long as it's going, there's hope.
Indeed, conversation and I would say ongoing maintenance of wisdom and insight contained in a book is definitely important. But ultimately, it's about giving people actionable guidance so they can do something about themselves, their local community, the city, the state, and in the end, the entire country. I see a lot of frustration in the system, which causes people to think about how to change the status quo politically. Your founding fathers, especially Jefferson, had such a clear idea of what the ideal is: a piece of healthy, fertile land, a family, a rifle to defend it, and a local community that imbues the entire operation with meaning and security. I tell you, a lot of people today crave that beautiful simplicity that at the moment is unattainable for most.
Well, the Jeffersonian ideal has been extremely important, of course, to my family. The small landholder as the most important part of a democracy is, I believe that absolutely. I am not in my personal life, which is not much separated from my work life, in fact, hardly at all, but I'm not apolitical in the sense that, I mean, I am a Democrat. I am very much afraid of what's happening now in the country. But in our part of the world, we call what my family has been, we call ourselves yellow dog Democrats, meaning we'd vote for a yellow dog before. But, um, but that said, I never expected much from the Republicans. They've been selling out the land and the people for a long time. I had more hopes for the Democrats, and I guess I still have them, but I've been terribly disappointed in the fact that both parties serve the economy here. The economy runs the government. I remember saying to my father years ago, why doesn't Obama just shut Guantanamo? Um, that probably was a naive question, but he said, because Obama doesn't run the country. And I believe that Absolutely. So while I continue to be concerned, and I will certainly vote, and if somebody gives me, if somebody comes to me and asks, my father and I are having a conversation with a U.S. representative from Washington State. Her last name is Perez this afternoon. She reached out to us because she's on the House Ag Committee and she is extremely worried about what's going on and would like to know our thoughts about her policy work. Well, she's going to have her hands full with my father because he's going to start in about 50. No, he'll start with 1850. So the call will be long. But anyway, this is the first senator, representative, elected official who has reached out in this way to my father. The first one. So we're taking this seriously. I mean, we both think that she doesn't know what she's up against, but we're for her. I mean, we appreciate her trying. But that's an amazing thing that my father has been a well-known writer, social critic, and so on for he'll be 90 on August 5th. All these years, and this is the first time somebody has reached out to ask what can be done in Washington.
I want to say it's truly wild that this is the first time ever a US politician has reached out to the great Wendell Berry for advice or guidance of some kind. On the other hand, I understand. Of course they don't want to speak to him. Your entire political system is captured by big business, and Wendell's life philosophy strikes at the very heart of big ag. Of course, they would want to avoid contact at all costs, so kudos to Marie Perez who broke the silence. Your father critiqued the mechanization and over-industrialization of farming. How do you see this trend evolving today? And what are its impacts on farming communities? Have they been completely decimated because of it?
Pretty much. The co-op that I keep referring to, I have to do some explaining about always, because it was the Burley Tobacco Program that my grandfather was the principal author of the legislation. It was a crop that kept small, diversified farmers on the land and allowed them to pass that land on. Tobacco, of course, became a terrible problem, and I'm not arguing for tobacco. I always simply hold up the principles of the program and the result of the program, the health. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but the health that bloomed from the land up, small farmers, well placed on good farms, diversified farms that were producing food also, and keeping these rural communities stable, businesses stable, small businesses stable. My father says, as an aside, all this talk in this country about you can be anything you want to be, telling children that they can be anything they want to be. Well, anything except a small business person or a farmer. You can't be those things. And mostly you're going to become a wage slave, but that's another topic. But anyway, this program was lost mostly due to global pressure. The big tobacco companies finally got what they wanted, which was cheap tobacco from other places where people make $1 a day or something. What replaced the tobacco program, ironically, was corn and soybeans coming in on our rolling landscape. So the irony is that what replaced a crop that was said to be unhealthy was the toxic, erosive farming of corn and soybeans. So that's just nonsense. I think often what we're trying to do at the Berry Center is make sense out of nonsense. It's nonsensical what's happened. And who does all that serve? The big equipment, the GMO seeds that are owned by very few. In parts of our state, we have CAFOs, hogs and chickens raised in just ought to be illegal. I mean, for a country so concerned about dogs and cats, we can hardly stand the notion that any dog or cat is ever even left out in the rain. We're quite content to get cheap chickens and cheap pork and cheap beef from tortured animals. So it's just crazy. All of the things cheap and efficient. Those are our enemies. I did look up the Dyson Farm Project. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. We had just recently something like it in Kentucky. It was called App Harvest, and the idea was that this young fellow was going to supply the entire Eastern Seaboard with um, tomatoes, herbs, lettuce, and so on. It got a lot of attention, as these big ideas always do. Our sitting governor talked about it. The only time I've heard him give a nod to agriculture. It was I think when the project ended, $82 million was lost or something. It was huge, huge. Oh, and those greenhouses were to be on top of where mountains had been removed to get coal. It's just a perfect progression. But then they couldn't do that because the mountains that they've removed the tops of are unstable. So you couldn't put these giant greenhouses on top of them. But anyway, what happened was bankruptcy. I mean, it was just a completely crazy, huge idea that continues the fantasy that my father started talking about in The Unsettling, which is that we can bypass nature. We don't have to live by the rules of nature. We, with our big brains, will use technology and get ourselves out of whatever trouble we are getting ourselves into. It's not true. It is not true. We have a threat now to our good farmland, our best farmland, with solar, with industrial solar. Another idea, I'm not against solar. My father has solar panels, small solar panels. I don't have any, but we in this country can never start small. We start huge. So once again, we're saying, well, farmland, we don't need farmland, we need power. And so it continues the fantasy again that we're going to live exactly the way we are now. Things are going to go on the way they are. And we're just going to use technology to get ourselves out of trouble, get ourselves what we want. It's fundamentalism. It's crazy. Now, I mean, we all use technology. My husband has 2 small tractors. I, in fact, am talking to you on technology. So if technology is used as a tool, that's one thing, but our culture has no idea how to use anything. We think we're limitless, and we think we can do anything. And we should know we can't. We should know from climate change we can't.
One of the key lessons from your father's Unsettling of America was to know thy limits. Set realistic limits harmonized with the cycles of nature.
Yes.
I thought that was very simple but absolutely critical takeaway from the book. The other critical theme which Wendell Berry emphasizes in his book is the importance of community and local knowledge. How has this influenced your work and the initiatives that you're involved in?
My daughter, Virginia, runs our bookstore and culture center, and she out of that comes a local reading program. This is one example. She started the reading program, gosh, it's been a while now, 7 or 8 years ago at least, maybe more. And as children do, she didn't, I knew she was going to do it. She didn't ask me my opinion about some of it. And the first book she chose for the community read, she raised local money to buy a book that so it would be free to anybody in the community who wanted one. The first book she chose was The Memory of Old Jack, which I referred to earlier. I would never have chosen one of my father's books to start. I mean, we just don't put ourselves forward in that way. But this is what's wonderful about, you know, generations following generations is that they bring a freshness that she had that I didn't. The first year we had that program existed, 400 people got free books in our county. 20 book groups were formed, and they weren't even necessarily book groups. They were people in different communities in our small county getting together to just talk and talk about the book. And people said things to me. These are, I want you to understand, I am never um, looking down on anybody who says the things they say. I'm just, I mean, these are smart people, cultured people, but cultured in the sense of understanding what's necessary to survive. Anyway, a woman I went to high school with said, "I've never read a book, and now I've read the Memory of Old Jack, and your father has told my people's story, and he's told it with respect." And now I'm reading. This woman formed a group in a little town called Port Royal that my parents live right outside of. Um, and in fact, everything's almost outside of Port Royal. I think the population now is 82. But anyway, she formed a group to get together to just talk about history. She had a Port Royal History Day that we all went and looked at all the buildings and talked about the past. So today, I know, well, in a month or so, we'll have our All Fall Festival where this year's read will be announced and given out. This year, we're reading a book by an Amish man named David Klein called Round of a Country Year. My daughter has ordered something like 800 copies because we fully expect that many will be given. This has drifted into other adjoining counties. Um, so once again, people are getting together and they're talking about something other than politics and divides and social issues that they may very well disagree on. But there are other things to talk about that bring people together. And from that coming together can come other kinds of understanding. When we first got our farmers together, I wouldn't have uttered the phrase climate change. I just wouldn't have done it. It's a politically charged issue. I just wouldn't have done it. Now, I'm still not going to go, we're not going to go talk about climate change, but we can talk about all kinds of things we couldn't talk about before. And yeah, I'd say climate change now. I would say, I see what you're dealing with now. It's different than it was. How are you dealing with it? So yes, that's the kind of coming together that I think should be happening all over the country. But I used the words big solution a little while ago. We are just in this country suckers for the big solution. What we need more of is people going to work right where they are. And that can be done anywhere. My father says it can be done in prison. I mean, you do what's right in front of you to do, the right thing. You just do it. And not wait. Don't wait. People just need to stop waiting for politicians and other people to do the right thing. I think another thing, and I can speak now, having acquired a good deal of age myself, people need to stop separating themselves by feeling better than other people because they do this or they don't do this. We're all implicit in the general sham, as Thomas Merton said. This is a mess we're in. And do you know who Wes Jackson is? He runs the Land Institute, or did, started the Land Institute in Kansas. He's a great friend of my father's. He's worked on perennial wheat crops most of his life. He's a phenomenal man. But he said probably 25 years ago, it's dated now, so we need to insert new examples. But he said, if we come out of this and all we've accomplished is a bunch of Priuses and squiggly light bulbs, we won't have done much. And I just see too much self congratulating over, I always buy organic, or I always do this. Great. Be proud of yourself. But it's, we're all in this together every day, all of us. I drove here in a car. I turned on my light powered by coal. I did all, I can't get out of it. So with that in mind, I just think going, right where you are, then you can know people, then you can appreciate things that are wonderful about your neighbors and friends that are beyond politics, or above politics, I should say.
This is pure speculation, but would you say that this reluctance to stay close to where one was born has something to do, broadly speaking, with the erosion of patriotic ethos all over the West? We live in a time where people have no allegiance to the place they were born into. A lot of people are buying into this idea of a global citizen, transient, always on the move, always thinking about the next adventure, knowing that they can move if things go south. Like, what do you think?
I'm more provincial. I belong to a particular place. Clearly, mobility is a terrible problem. If you think you can move away from the problems you cause, and I don't mean that I think people are actively thinking that, but it's just built in. If you can move away from the problems, then you're not going to try to solve them. You're not going to try to establish meaningful ties. And once you begin to establish ties to a place, and as I said earlier, my mother is from Northern California. She established her home here. She made a place for herself and her children and daddy here. So the poet Gary Snyder says, uh, you can move around, just stop somewhere. You don't have to stay home, just stop. Um, yes, I think the whole culture is just, well, it's moving us toward um, some kind of disaster. I don't like to speak apocalyptically. We don't know the future, and I've got great hope. Actually, I have not much problem with hope. Um, I just, hope is a virtue that I think is just kind of required of us, those of us who love younger people and um, have work to do. Hope is just necessary. My father says hope is very different than optimism. Um, Optimism implies a plan. I'm not too interested in optimism or pessimism, two sides of the same coin. Um, Once you find something to do that you need to do, that you want to do, that you're passionate about doing, I think hope happens. It just happens. And then you have to practice it, of course, every day.
All right, let's switch gears because I'm mindful of time. One thing I also wanted to ask you about today is agrarianism. Would you be able to speak about the relevance of agrarianism today as your father envisioned it? Do you see a revival of agrarian principles in contemporary farming practices at all? Like, what do you see on the ground?
Yes, yes. In the lives of the people that I meet, I was just on a speaking trip to Santa Fe, 1st of June, I think. Um, and I saw a lot of really passionate small farmers farming in little microclimates on the Rio Grande. I saw actually quite a bit of generational farming going on, children taking over for parents. Um, And everywhere I go, there are pieces of it, cities and country. There are pieces of agrarianism. It certainly hasn't taken any kind of hold on the consciousness of the culture of America. I mean, as I said, we're still out way out on the margins. I mean, it's farmers can't survive, for instance, in a free market. Farmers can't survive, can't farm well in a free market. I mean, that's just in the capitalist uh, culture or economy that we have now. It's going to squeeze out everything small. That's just the way it is. Um, I'm seeing entrepreneurial farmers squeeze each other out in this little tiny, they don't mean to. It's just the way it works. The people who can get bigger, the small get out. Um, but I know that there are people all over this country and in your country, in both your countries, working on these things every day. King Charles quoted my father in his book called Harmony. I mean, he has a kind of ethic. I don't know King Charles, but I think he has a kind of ethic that I think he's been made fun of for, but a kind of an agrarian ethic. I think it's certainly different than mine, but it exists. Um, so yes, I see pockets of it all over the place. I think in young people's disquiet and maybe unhappiness with the way things are, that is that's kind of seeding in them. Agrarianism is seeding in their hearts and their minds. We've made it awful hard for young people. I worry about them because their challenges are great. And when I started farming in 1981, about a mile from here, I was surrounded by farmers who had farmed in that area for, well, their families had been there for generations. They came by to help us in ways I didn't even recognize as help. I mean, we just had so much help. And then, of course, my family was here. Young people are often kind of on their own, and they need these communities desperately, and they need these books, these ideas of people who've gone before them. That is one thing that I really worry about with this kind of crazy anti-history culture we've got now, which is if you're old and you're white, you have nothing relevant to say. And I'm sorry about that because it takes away from young people. Teachers, it doesn't mean they have to believe that my father or Wes Jackson or Aldo Leopold and others are completely right, but they need them. They need to read them, and they need to read them with some kind of respect and make their own judgments. But I hate to see it taken away from them.
There is something quite intriguing you've said earlier. Correct me if I didn't get this right, but I think I've heard you say that you think that farmers cannot operate successfully in free market economy model. If that is the case, what is the ideal state operating model? Is it detailed top-down regulation by both your federal and state government? I mean, my thinking is very much predicated on this idea of better outcomes through reduced regulations, where you have less administration and generally less bureaucracy. It gives people, well, farmers in this case, freedom to experiment and express themselves, obviously with sustainability and healthy environment in mind. Do you think it's possible to generate better outcomes with more regulation?
So let me start with what I think is impossible. It is impossible for us to imagine at this point that the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, will see the sense in our home place meat and its principles and decide that this country really needs a population of good livestock producers, raising livestock out in pasture and supplying local markets because that's safe, because that's the supply lines are too long. That they then want to set about to put in place some kind of protection for those farmers. It is impossible to imagine that that will happen, because what we have here, and what has never really been questioned from high places, we have a cheap food economy. We want food cheap. And so grain farmers produce way too much grain and then are subsidized because they're planting under parity. They're not getting back cost of production. So those farmers are subsidized. So we're subsidizing a really terrible farming system, which and that farming system funnels money straight to agri-industrial corporations. So you can see how it all works. It all works perfectly. It's people talk to me all the time about a food system, food systems. I'm like, we have one food system in this country, and it's working beautifully for the people who want it this way. So a few people are getting the benefit, and we're living with the destruction. So it's impossible to imagine right now that the government, USDA, would change their minds about how good that is, because that's our culture. That's land grant universities. They're bought and paid for. The colleges of agriculture are bought and paid for. Agri-industrial companies are paying for the research. They're getting the benefit of the research. Anyway, all I can think to do now is to offer examples of another way. Our home place meat is another way, and it's supplying the market with a mid-priced, excellent meat while paying everybody down the line, our local processor, our farmers, our distributor, fairly. Organic Valley is a dairy co-op in Wisconsin. It's based on the same principles that our home place meat is based on. It's based on the tobacco program. It's doing very well. I don't know enough about it now. I know the founder, and I know how it was doing until he stepped down. But I just know that there are examples here and there that I hear about, that people are doing what needs to be done in order to keep the farmers we've got going and new farmers a way in. That's all I can think to do at this point. Bless the people who are working on policy on our behalf. But I got tired of waiting. We're just going to have to do what we can do. If we succeed and if we fail, we've got to do it. We're responsible, again, as my father says, we're responsible to make the effort. And that's what we're doing here. And so the examples survive. And as long as we have the examples, and we're desperate for good examples, then we've got places to look. And what we're trying to do is come up under what's coming apart with something solid. And I don't know what else we can do. So as long as the goal of the USDA in this country is cheap food, there's nothing we can do about them.
Would you say that the general sentiment, at least in some fraction of the American society, is changing at this point in time? What is strange is that Americans are some of the unhealthiest people on the planet, which is very confusing, because how can this be? Your country is the wealthiest nation, it's the most powerful nation. Your country should have the best food, the cleanest air and water, but it's the very opposite of that. Some kind of a strange inversion has occurred. From your point of view, are you noticing people waking up to that fact and wanting to do something about it? How is that sentiment changing?
I think that there is certainly a percentage of people in America who are worried, and they're trying their best to figure out a way to live responsibly and well in what's clearly a crazy economy, out of control economy. I don't want to speak negatively, honestly, but I think we're dodging the truth, though. We're dodging psychologically, psychically, maybe, the truth of the fact that things are going to have to change. And it's the way they change that where we have some possibility of movement. We can keep going the way we're going, and the change could be pretty seriously bad. It could be very hard. It is hard. It's hard now. Or we could begin the sort of slow and steady work of rebuilding good land use. Well, now I say rebuilding. A friend of mine says we've never settled America, we've colonized it. So let me rephrase and say, let's figure out how we can settle this country. How can we settle the people and the land, and the people? Never, the people should belong together. They should never have been separated. I mean, and I think the disquiet, and I mean, we're not even a happy country. I mean, clear violence is crazy. I mean, people can't concentrate for more than 15 seconds or something, I read. The average person in America can't come up with $400 if they have an emergency. I heard that recently on public radio. I mean, this is just ridiculous. And we've got to. My father said on the 4th of July, or he said it many years ago, and I remember it every 4th of July. It's when the world's most dependent people, the most dependent people the world has ever seen, celebrate their independence. I mean, we're just not thinking deeply enough, and we're not recognizing the fact that my father talked about it in the Unsettling, and I'll stand by it now. The change starts within the heart of the person. We have to change our hearts and our minds and change from there, our households. And I believe we've got to see that there's going to be a change. We're not going to may it possibly be living, having everything we want, expecting an upper middle class American life. I mean, this is one of the things I have to say to our students is, if you're coming into this thinking that you're going to have 2 weeks vacation with pay and you're going to be comfortable all the time, you're going to have to learn to take your joy from the place you are, from your farm. If you're lucky enough to have one. I have known people, my father is one, who have lived their entire lives fascinated by the small area around them. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to be alive in the world. But we're not going to have everything we want the minute we want it forever. If we want to live well, I mean, this idea in America that we don't want to have our children be less well off or something like that than we are, it's absurd. Why would I want my children and grandchildren to be better off than I've been? I hope that they live, that they have a wonderful life like I've had, not more. I don't want them. They don't need more. They need what we have. What we have is here. What we need is here, I should say. And these are things that I think almost everybody, including myself on some days, are dodging. We're dodging that issue. I know good and well the politicians are, if they've even thought of it. I don't know if they've even thought of it. I mean, Elon Musk, who is an absolute crazy man, thinks that he's planning to go somewhere else. He's going to Mars or something. I mean, he recognizes that things are going wrong. He's just going to go somewhere else. So, oh Lord. Well, I do believe that the truth will set us free. I think if we acknowledge the truth of the way it is now, what's with warts and all, and stop being nationalists and patriots, but be citizens of particular places, then we can begin to feel hopeful. We can begin to do the work we need to do. We can stop thinking that somebody with a big idea is going to come in and fix it for us, because big ideas are the problem. Big ideas got us here. it's interesting to me. I hear people, as I'm sure everybody does, talk about the need for education, and everybody needs an education. Well, yes, I believe people need an education, a cultural education. I believe people need a liberal arts education. But I don't believe it all has to come from a college or a university, but I believe we need it. But I hear what they're saying. They're talking about education, and if you can get to Harvard and Yale, you'll really be educated and really be useful. Well, that, pardon me, is bullshit. That sort of education got us where we are today. So that those people have colluded to stop thought in America, as far as I can tell. Now, I should immediately say, I also have known people who've gone to those schools. A board member of ours is a wonderful person and went to Yale and came home thinking, okay, now I need to make myself at home here. So I just think we need the courage and the passion and the love to figure out where we are and what we need to do where we are. And that's what my father has done.
It would be very hard for me to disagree with your statements about Harvard and Yale and the kind of people that come out of these so-called elite institutions completely misguided about the nature of the world and the nature of the problems we are facing as a civilization. This leads me to the Dyson Farming Project video I have shared with you prior to us recording this interview. I have to say I have a lot of appreciation for James Dyson's engineering prowess and how he started and evolved the Dyson business. But when I looked at his farming experiment, and this was exactly at the same time when I was finishing your father's book, I just couldn't help but feel that the man, not your father, I mean James Dyson here, is so incredibly misguided. How he thinks about the nature of the farming problem and the solutions that are required to solve it.
Oh, he's completely misguided. I did look at it. I looked at it, clicked on it once, and clicked right off it. And then I went back to it because I felt like I owed you the look. I can't say that I studied it, but I told you about the efforts here called App Harvest with the huge greenhouses from the Netherlands. It's the same thing. We're going to get outside of nature somehow. We're going to get beyond the need for human beings, I guess. I don't know. And by the way, I bought a Dyson vacuum cleaner once and I hated it. so there. And it's too expensive. It's technological fundamentalism, and I don't like it. And I'm going to tell on it. I'm going to tell on you, and I'm going to show my father.
I think if you do that, your father will be absolutely petrified.
He won't be petrified. He'll be annoyed.
I bet he will be. You know, in the Unsettling of America, your father writes so beautifully and poetically about the necessity to retain the human in farming, to touch the soil and feel the land. I was really impacted by these passages when I was reading them. And I think this Dyson Farming Project works from an implicit assumption that farming is super hard work, which in a way it is. But his idea is to automate absolutely everything with machines and software, take the human out of it completely, and turn the human into the ultimate consumer of machine-produced and delivered product. Total annihilation of human connection to food, and that's the misguided bit to me. These technocratic industrialists miss the spiritual connection and deep philosophy that your father, Wendell Berry, understood so well.
I think people don't remember anymore that we're a land-based economy. Everything is coming from the land. Everything he's doing depends on the land. To sustain something like, it's not, I hate to use the word sustainable, it's so overused, but the sustainable agriculture means people firmly placed. It's the Jeffersonian ideal. People firmly placed on a small amount, on the amount of land that they can manage, that they can see every day, that they can take care of, that they can love. Um, in our country, there after the Civil War, there was an effort to, well, actually, ex-slaves asked for 40 acres and a mule, um, which represented their actual knowledge of what a lot of us a lot of people have never known, what you really need to be free, as free as you can be, um, what you really need to take care of yourself, and that is those two things. That is some kind of freedom. All perfect freedom is not available, but um, we're dependent on the land and on nature. I think that's the most American ideal, maybe, that's ever been put forward in this country. And of course, it was stomped out as it sort of there was an effort, and then it was stomped out. Um, but that just acknowledged limits based on, I think, reality, the truth, what people can actually take on and do well. Dyson, who I certainly don't know, never will know. I mean, his idea is sort of is limitless. I mean, we can do what we need to do as big as we need to do it. I just that efforts like that lead me as close to despair as I ever get, because I know people are sucked in by them. They love those ideas. If our governor went over there, he would want to bring it back in a second.
The shiny thing does look very attractive from the distance, especially to a politician. You know, technological terror does have an appeal to the investor and the tech nerd who are keen to make a quick buck. This is by no means directed at Mr. Dyson, because when listening to him, I think the intent comes from a good place. And he's committing himself and his resources to these experiments because he's quite a curious individual.
The possibility that human beings could do work that they passionately love, that they are passionate about. My grandfather said about farming, it'll keep you up at night. He actually said, it's like a woman, it'll keep you up at night. I mean, passionate. I come from a long line of passionate farmers. And I've known a lot of passionate farmers, and I see them all over this country. And they're what we need to build from.
Mary Berry, thank you very much for your time today. This was a lot of fun.
Well, I was delighted. I enjoyed it. And maybe we'll meet sometime in person.
Well, I sincerely hope we do. And if we do, at some point in the future, the dinner's on me.
You go to bed.
This was Mary Berry telling me to go to bed as we've concluded the interview at 2 a.m. She's a lovely woman who, like her father, is truly inspirational, quite passionate, and very driven with her mission to revitalize rural America by supporting small farmers and advocating for responsible, sustainable agricultural practices. Unsettling of America by Wendell Berry was a book recommended to me some time ago. I've procured a copy and left it on my bookshelf untouched for a few years. Then, as I was finishing reading Eric Neumann's The Origins and History of Consciousness, I wanted the next book in the queue to be a little bit lighter, less sophisticated and easier to read, and without knowing much about its author, Wendell Berry, I just grabbed The Unsettling of America, thinking I'm just going to blitz through this book. But Wendell's work was anything but simple. It's full of deep thought and sophistication as well as deep wisdom. As Mary mentioned in the interview, There is rage in that book that speaks to the ground shifting under its author's feet at the time of writing, but there is also so much beauty and profundity in it. I can't recommend this book highly enough. Once you get familiar with the unsettling, I'm pretty sure you'll be hooked and you would want to read everything that Wendell has ever written. Give it a try, you'll not be disappointed. As always, I've left a couple of links for you in the show notes, so take a quick look there for references to some of the things that we've discussed in this interview today. Thank you for your attention and see you next time.